Alright, let's go ahead and do Algebra 1. I always get mixed up which videos these are, so I always have to look on the side. This is lesson 85. We're learning about Pythagorean theorem. This is one of my favorite things to learn. A lot of things in math is my favorite. But this is Pythagorean theorem. It's dealing with right triangle. This is the beginning of trigonometry, but it's very fun and simple once you understand it. If we look on this side, what you need to understand is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. That's the equation. It's very easy to memorize. It's one of those that you memorize when you graduate high school. A and b, they're interchangeable, meaning you can replace them. It doesn't matter which one's first, but they both represent the legs. Legs is also meaning the sides. So A and B is considered the sides of the triangle, and C is your hypotenuse. A key thing I like to tell my older upperclassmen is the hypotenuse is always right across from that 90-degree angle. So wherever that 90-degree angle is, that's where the hypotenuse is. So right here. It's always right across from it. So if this is the hypotenuse, then these two are considered the legs. So it doesn't matter which order you go to. So first term squared plus second term squared is equal to hypotenuse squared. It's an equation meaning one side is equal to the other side. Example 1, we're going to go ahead and solve for these. I do recommend a calculator because squared, especially when it's getting higher up there, it's harder to memorize. So here, according to this, it's a squared plus b squared. Your side squared is equal to your hypotenuse squared. A squared, A and B are considered one of your legs. So first, we have to find our hypotenuse. Remember, your 90-degree symbol is right here, your little box. That means whatever side's right across from it is your hypotenuse. So that means here, my hypotenuse is C. So that means I'm just going to put c squared there. Now, everything else is my sides. So there's only 3 sides to a triangle. So I'm going to do the first one, 6 squared, and then plus 8 squared is equal to your hypotenuse squared. Include that squared too. Now, next thing you do, apply PIMDAS. Do you do exponents first or do you add exponents? So 6 squared is 36, 8 squared is 64, and then you can add. I would say one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot, especially in upperclassmen, is they add the numbers and then they square it. I'm like, no, square first and then add it. So now when you add these numbers together, you end up with 100 is equal to c squared. We need the c by itself. In this case, c is not by itself. If you leave it like that, it's wrong. To get rid of it, you have to kind of undo it. And just like multiplication undoes division, addition undoes subtraction, the squared the square root undoes the squared, and it goes hand in hand. So that means whenever you see the squared root, or whenever you see the squared, go ahead and square root it. So this cancels out and this cancels out, you're left with c. The square root of 100 is 10. So that means your answer here would be 10. Next one. One side squared plus the other side squared is equal to your hypotenuse squared. Kind of erased it. This is considered 7. Ooh. 7. So now, again, your hypotenuse is always right across from your side from your box. So 7 is your hypotenuse. Now let's go ahead and fill out the formula. I rewrite the formula like I always do. You should always rewrite the formula. Your first side squared, I would say my first side is t squared, plus your second side squared, which is your 4 squared. Now, this is equal to your hypotenuse squared. So that would be your 7 squared. Next up, go ahead and evaluate the squared. So t squared just stays as t squared, plus 4 squared, which is 16, is equal to 7 squared, which is 49. You need to get the t by itself. Now we have to go ahead and subtract both sides by 16 to get the t squared by itself on one side, because we're trying to solve now for a variable. So 49 minus 16 is 33. Now, last step, it should always be your last step, is you square root both sides. This cancels out this, you're left with the t, and the square root of 33, on average, will be about 5.7. It'll be a bunch of decimals. You can leave it as square root of 33, or you can leave it as 5.7, unless it's asking for specifics. In example 1, it doesn't ask for specifics, so it doesn't really matter however place you put it to. See, you have a triangle here. Identify your hypotenuse. So here's the box. That means it's right across. That means this is considered your hypotenuse. According to the equation, your one side squared, which is k squared, plus your other side squared, 5 squared, is equal to your hypotenuse squared. So it's square root of 61. Now let's go ahead and solve for each one. K squared just becomes k squared. 5 squared becomes 25. And the square root of 61 squared, remember they undo each other and you're only left with just a 61 by itself. Now you solve for k squared. To solve for it, you have to get it by itself. To get it by itself, you subtract the two. 61 minus 25, and you get 36. Now you take the square root. That should be one of your last steps. Now you get k is equal to 6. D. Now identify your hypotenuse. I drew the arrow here. Remember, it's right across from your 9 degree. So that means everything else is your side. Your first side, 8 squared. It could be 12 as well. You could interchange them. It doesn't really matter because they're adding in the end. So 8 squared plus your other side squared is equal to hypotenuse squared, which is m squared. 8 squared is 64. 12 squared is 144. M squared is just m squared. Now, 64 plus 144. Now, I could draw the lines if it could really help you, but by this part, you should know how to do two-step equations. You add them, and when you add them, you get 208 equals m squared. Now you get the m squared by itself to just get m, and you get the square root of 208. If they ask you to simplify in radical forms, look for factors of 208 with one of them being a perfect square. And after a while, you'll end up with 16 times 13 gives you 208. Remember, you start dividing by all the perfect squares. Divide 208 by 4, 208 by 9, by 16, by 25, by 36, 49, 64, etc., etc. And then until you finally get one that you get an answer that's even. Now here, you get 4 radical 13 is equal to m. So if they ask you in simplified radical form, that's what I want. If it says in decimal form and round, then you would have to round. But if they ask for simplified radical form, you have to make sure you have it this term. Now, here we're learning about triples. There are some triangles. If you have one of the two numbers here, let's say you have 3 and 4, you don't have to do the Pythagorean theorem because the last one should always be 5. These are the special triples. I think there's like 5 or 6 of them. But the two main ones is 3, 4, 5, 5, 12, and 13. If you notice, when you have like a group of numbers, like for example 2, the largest number is always considered the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse should always be the largest numbers of the 3. If you have 5, 17, and 12, that's not considered a right triangle. The whole reason why we do Pythagorean theorem is because they prove to be right triangles. It proves it to be right. So if it doesn't prove it, that means it's not a right triangle. Now example 2, they're asking us, can you prove that these triangles are right? Now, can you see A? Yeah. For A, you have 9, 40, 41. 41 is the largest number. This is your hypotenuse. To prove it, we use a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So one side squared, it could be 9, it could be 41, it really doesn't matter. 9 squared plus 40 squared is equal to 41 squared. Remember equations? One side should equal the other side, and that's why we do a lot of equations. So 9 squared is 81, 4 squared, this is plus, 40 squared is 1610 is equal to 41 squared, and 41 squared is 1681. Now you add this side here, you have 1681. Here you have 1681 equals 1681. It is, yes, it's a right triangle. So this proves that it's going to be a right triangle. Next one, 8, 10, and 12. This is considered the hypotenuse. So now let's go ahead and solve. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Your first side, 8. Second side, 100. And then your hypotenuse is 12. 8 squared plus 10 squared equals 12 squared. 8 squared is 64. 10 squared is 100. 12 squared is 144. Remember, one side, the left side, should equal the right side. 64 plus 100, 164 equals 144. They do not equal. It's not a right triangle. So this proves it not to be a right triangle. C, let's try the last one. 7, 11, and radical 170. If you don't know which one's the largest number, if you take the square root of 170, you're going to get a larger number than 11. I don't remember what it was, but you do get a larger number. Now, go ahead and apply the a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and b your sides. 7 squared plus 11 squared equals square root of 170 squared. Now we go ahead and solve. 7 squared is 49. 11 squared is 121. Yeah. And then the square root of 170 squared, they cancel out, and you're just left with a 170. You add them together, and you get 170 equals 170. So this one proves it to be a right triangle. So these are simple tricks to learn to see if it's a right triangle. Last one, they have a word problem. He said there's a ladder. C units, they have the height to the building being 20, and then from the ground to the ladder, from the building to the ladder, it's 5. Here they want us to find what's the height of the ladder is, how long it is. Here we create a triangle. If I take this triangle out, and remember, whenever you have the sides of buildings, that always creates perpendicular lines, meaning it always creates a right angle. It's perfectly straight up and down. If that building's not straight, it's kind of curved, it's going to kind of collapse unless it's made right. So here, if I were to create this to be a triangle, I end up with this. We can use Pythagorean theorem to solve for missing sides. For these type of problems, they love using word problems for this. So now, C is considered your hypotenuse. So everything else is your sides or your legs. So 5 squared plus 20 squared is equal to C squared. 5 squared is 25, 20 squared is 400, and C squared is just C squared. Now you have 425 equals C squared. And to get the C by itself officially, you're going to square root both sides. And you end up C being 20.6, and that's 0.6 feet. So whenever you have word problems, they do want it in terms of decimal or fraction. But in this case, it's going to be a decimal, and that's how long the ladder really is. If you have any more questions, make sure to email me down there. Make sure you guys are persistent with your homework. Some of you have been missing a lot. Don't keep it up. Make sure you're always doing your work. I will get in contact with you if you're not doing your work, but please do your work, be diligent. We're almost done. Bye-bye.